Every year, around 500 people die from suicide in Israel. That's even higher than the amount of people that pass away in traffic accidents. Well, joining us now in the studio are two incredibly strong women who have dealt with suicide in their families firsthand. Tori Maidenberg and Cass Feder are now helping the organization Bishvil Hahayim recruit and promote the first ever English language support group for people who have lost a loved one to suicide. Girls, thank you for coming in. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you for inviting us.
All right, so let's begin with hearing a little bit about your personal stories. I know this is hard to talk about, but I think it's important, you know, to get into why we're here today.
Yeah. So for me, I lost my mother to suicide in 2007, so just over 10 years ago. And I was 18 at the time, and I have a brother. He was 13. My mom had just turned 50. And it was difficult. I'm originally from Canada, and at the time I live here, but at the time I was living in Canada, so I was surrounded by my family at that point. But it was definitely difficult to experience that. But luckily I was surrounded by family, and I had their support.
Yeah, and so my brother, he died by suicide a year and a half ago. He was 27 years old. And for 5 years, he'd been struggling with depression and anxiety and various physical illnesses. I found out when I was living here already in Israel, so it was a bit different because all my family and friends were back home. But I was really lucky that I had my husband and my husband's family there for me. But I was definitely frustrated that I couldn't find any support groups in English.
Right, so I think obviously the experience of living in Israel is already difficult in of itself when you're a new immigrant, right? But then to go through this type of experience, finding a support system that really kind of fit your needs as English speakers, as ultimately foreigners in Israel, probably wasn't the simplest.
There are lots of support groups out there for families who've lost a loved one to suicide, but they're all in Hebrew, and I could not find anything in English. And that was huge because I saw an opportunity for there to be, so I reached out to an organization called Bishvil Hahayim. They're an Israeli nonprofit that deals with suicide prevention as well as supporting families who've lost a loved one to suicide. And they agreed to create the first ever English support group.
There's clearly a huge taboo that exists around suicide and mental health as an issue just as a whole. And did you find that to be the case in your experiences when you were trying to find help? You know, forget just finding a group, but really being able to talk to other people about what you were going through.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There definitely is a stigma out there, and I think part of it is really understanding what suicide is. And when you have a perception of it as being something of a selfish act, that really impacts how people perceive it and how people talk about it. So when people perceive it as a selfish act, then they tend to be silent about it, whether they've known someone who's committed suicide or known of someone else who's committed suicide that's not necessarily close to them. And I find when that's the case, you associate, you know, suicide with selfish, and you don't feel like, you know, that's correct, because so much of it is more in the mind of the person who's suffering, wanting to say, you know, I don't want to inflict that on someone else. So for me, understanding that, you know, in the mind of someone who's suffering, it's more about, you know, not being a burden and not wanting to be in that position. So in my own experience, I know that a lot of the discourse around this has been pretty unfortunate in a lot of ways, because you know, there's a misconception that it is selfish, and
yeah, and I mean, I think obviously there's a larger issue here, which is kind of the mixed emotions that loved ones feel when you know, a family member chooses to commit suicide. I mean, Tori, maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so absolutely. Grief around suicide is very unique in that the emotions that we're experiencing are unique to the aftermath of a loved one's suicide. Not to say that everyone has the same emotions. It's going to be different if you're a sibling, if you're a parent that lost a child that lost a parent, etc. But there are some common threads. So guilt and blame are two very prevalent emotions. Guilt for not doing enough, not saying enough, or saying the wrong thing, for feeling relief even if it's momentarily. Blame onto yourself, onto others, all the what ifs, what if I'd done this or that, would that have changed the outcome? And those are very judgmental emotions. You're judging yourself quite harshly. And that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people don't seek out help, because if you're judging yourself so harshly, you're afraid that others...
Right, there's this feeling that you could have somehow prevented this from happening, right?
Yes, and that's why these support groups are so important, because it creates that safe space to come and to share and to not feel judged and to know that your emotions are completely natural and normal, and that there are other people who are feeling the exact same things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also just, you know, this is something that we talked about before the interview, but just the issue of being able to speak about it publicly with other people. How do you explain to your, you know, friends, acquaintances, what is happening in your life, the way in which you lost this individual? That by itself, because of the taboo that exists, makes everything so much more difficult. So, I mean, obviously this English language group is going to be huge for so many people here in Israel. How can people reach out if they want to join the group?
Yeah, so one, please share this video, because we do want to get the outreach out there. Two, there's going to be a link attached to this post with the Google form where people can sign up. And three, if you are an organizer of a community that deals with a lot of Olim, you can, first of all, share this interview, and you can also reach out to Cass or I, and together we can figure out how to promote the group in your community.
And the great thing about this group is that they're relatively small, about 15 people. And you know, it's with a licensed professional that will facilitate the group, and so it gives you a chance to sort of sit and relate to people who've gone through similar things as you. And it's also a mixed group, so people have lost a sibling or a parent or an uncle, something along those lines.
Well, girls, listen, I just want to thank you so much for coming here and speaking about this issue. It's extremely difficult, I know that, and there's so much more that can be said just about, you know, mental health as a whole, and how we need to really reconsider.
There's a lot more.
How we consider mental health, but that's for next time.
Yes, that's for
There will be more. We will be doing more interviews about this topic.
Definitely.
It's so important. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.